Good afternoon, as it actually turns out it is for me. Today is December 19th, so cute little ornaments on today's little box here. And today's tea is peanut butter cup. So if we kind of angle this in there, you can see some nice chunks on here. So we're obviously expecting this guy to be a nice chocolatey, peanut buttery kind of dessert kind of tea. It has one of 3 pips on that caffeine meter. It does steep at 95 degrees Celsius for 5+ minutes, which right there tells me to expect that this is actually not a tea that has real tea in it. Instead, it's going to get its caffeine from other ingredients, as has been the case with a lot of those 5+ steeps. So that also means that I'm going to do my smell check really quick and show you the ingredients and immediately start getting that steep going while I talk to you about everything else. So in today's tea today, we do have apple, which we know to expect as that primary kind of thing, cocoa peel, cocoa bits, almonds, chocolate chips, artificial peanut butter and chocolate flavoring, and that's it. So for a tea that's called peanut butter cup, we only are getting the peanut butter flavoring from an artificial flavoring. So I'm going to be a little curious about that, potentially a bit skeptical because that artificial peanut butter is not necessarily always powerful in the way that you would like it to be. It definitely doesn't always bring home that peanut buttery taste. So, based on that process of elimination, as I'm thinking about ingredients to talk about, you probably have a good idea of what I'm going to talk about, and I will confirm your guesses here after I do my smell check. Well, amazingly enough, that peanut butter flavoring really does carry. I'm getting a lot of peanut butter notes. This definitely smells like peanut butter. I'm also getting some other after spice is what I want to say. And it's not chocolate. I'm not sure what that is. I'm actually wondering if a little bit of the bleed through from some of the other teas is starting to affect the way that these teas are the longer that they stay in there. I mean, yeah, they're all in these little boxes and they all have their own separate little home, but they are all stored in the same master box. So it's possible that there might be a little bit of cross bleed through. I wouldn't expect so though, because you've got a tin, with a really hard plastic cover up here. So I don't know. All right, so that big chunk here, that is 100% apple, nice and big. We've got some clear cocoa bits, more apple. That is still more apple. All these little squishy bits that I'm moving aside here, those are all apple. They've got real big apple chunks in this one. Let's see. Yeah, this might be cocoa peel. More apple. More apple. All right, I think I finally found a bit of almond, and it's like a scraped bit of almond in here. So almond is not even as prominent as I would hope with needing that nutty flavor. So this is going to be interesting. I'm becoming more skeptical by the moment. So here again, I have my little muslin tea bag. It mostly actually washed out pretty well. It was, remember, kind of a pink tinge. Instead, now I'm kind of left with some weird purpley residue. Anthocyanins. That's what does it. Anthocyanins will turn something purple. So, now because again with these massive chunks in here, and because again I'm not fully confident in the flavor, I'm actually dumping the whole sample tin here. I'm really just not confident that I'm gonna get a strong flavor otherwise. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. Get my water, measure it. I've actually really started to fall into a rhythm since moving up into this space, which I'm really happy about. Just because it means that I think I'm a little more consistent, in part because I have to move the water straight over the measuring cup the way that I have it now. So it's a lot harder for me to actually forget to measure. So. And I'm not bothering with wrapping my extra string around my muslin bag here today. Why? Mostly I'm just being lazy. The other reason is with these large chunks, I'm not super worried about detritus. So we go. All right, so hopefully you have your guesses about the ingredients and you were able to do some process of elimination. And so that really means that in this particular selection of tea, I really only have almonds to talk about. It's the one thing that I really haven't mentioned in depth. I've touched on them a little bit here and there as they relate to some other ingredients, but never really talked about them themselves. So that is absolutely where we are going to start. And then I will also talk very, very, very briefly about peanut butter cups, just because that's the name of the tea, and I figure it's another great way for me to add some more value, to you watching this video. So, starting with almond, as I mentioned, I've touched on almonds before, and the almond has many varieties, many of which, if you're not careful, will actually kill you. Almonds, if you do know, are pretty well known for containing cyanide in them, and I will also touch on that a little bit more in this particular video, so we'll just remember that. But predominantly when we talk about varieties of almond, we are talking about sweet almond or bitter almond. So that's just what those varieties all fall under. In broad strokes, the almond is part of the Prunus genus, which I touched on when I talked about the Just Peachy on December 12th. And it's classified in that subgenus Amygdalus, and again, thus it's really closely related to peaches. Now, the Amygdalus subgenus is distinct from other subgenera, which is apparently the plural of subgenus. Who knew? But yes, subgenera, by having a corrugated outer shell. So when you're actually if you get down into that peach pit and you get to the peach pit, it's got that groovy pit with those super deep crevices in it. That's the corrugation, like cardboard. And so almonds actually also have that inside of their fruit. And yes, they have a fruit. And that particular corrugated outer shell is called an endocarp, and it surrounds that inner seed, also called the kernel. So the kernel is actually what we end up eating and using in, all the things that we use almonds for. Now, the almond tree is native to Iran and surrounding countries, but it is actually widely cultivated elsewhere, especially now. The fruit of this tree, again, almond trees do bear fruit. It's called a drupe. Technically, actually, so is a peach. A peach is also a drupe. A drupe is just the technical name for a stone fruit. And a stone fruit or a drupe develops from a single carpel. And the carpel, if you recall anything about biology and botany lessons you may have had, it's the female reproductive part of a flower. Now, because of that, almonds are actually not a true nut. True nuts are nuts like hazelnuts, chestnuts, and acorns. But we use the term tree nut to describe any nut that might come from a tree. And this does actually apply to even the non-botanical nuts, the non-true nuts. And that includes, of course, almonds, pecans, and walnuts. And you mostly hear tree nuts when you're talking about people who have allergies. Tree nut allergies help distinguish people who might be allergic to peanuts, which are also not a true nut, and people who are allergic to tree nuts. Now, some people are allergic to all nuts like that, but just that's where the tree nut idea comes from. It's basically, it grows on a tree, somewhat nutty flavor. It's a nut, but not botanically. Anyway, the almond tree is a type of deciduous tree, so that means it sheds its leaves with the seasons, and it ranges in height from 13 to 33 feet, so these can be pretty big trees. It produces white or pale pink flowers, which then, of course, turn into those drupes, and each of the flowers have 5 petals. As implied from their native climate, Iran and the surrounding countries there, you can best find strong success with almond crops in Mediterranean climates because they have dry summers and mild, wet winters, which is ideal for an almond's growing season. Now, that said, the Royal Botanic Garden Edinburgh has actually done some reporting on countries and regions that cultivate almonds, or at least claim to cultivate almonds. And Germany, at least according to that society, is the northernmost country that does cultivate almonds. That said, you can actually apparently find almonds as far north as Iceland in their domesticated form, which is interesting. I would never expect to find almonds that far north for sure, but apparently you can find them. So it's not actually until the third year after you plant an almond that you can really make money off of the almond fruits and the almond kernels, the seeds, the nuts, as you will. And that's just a matter of getting it to actually produce enough that it's really worth the effort into it. So it's definitely a long-term commitment kind of crop. And it takes about 5 to 6 years in order for it to actually reach its full bearing potential. And that's 5 to 6 years after planting. So you just want to make sure that you're tending to that tree really well, obviously, and then being good about how you actually go through and harvest everything. So it's an interesting endeavor there, with that long to really get the full bearing potential. Fruits do mature in autumn, which is about 7 to 8 months after their flowering season. Something about the fruits is you can eat them. You can typically eat them while they're still young and green. That tends to be the safest time to eat them. It's actually a pretty sour fruit, and it is actually a popular snack across regions of the Middle East, and they will take the fruit and they will dip the entire fruit in salt and serve it that way, and that way it counteracts the sour taste. Just so you are aware, again, if you happen to come across the almond fruit, what you're getting in for is a fruit that is thick and leathery on the outside and has a grayish green color, and actually has that fuzzy exterior that we associate with peaches. So if you are not a fuzzy peach kind of person, you definitely prefer nectarines, which are the smooth skinned peaches, as I've mentioned, then you are not going to really enjoy the almond fruit at all, but you can eat it. As far as the history of almond cultivation goes and the domestication, it's a little sparse in terms of the information I was finding, without going hugely down a rabbit hole of research here. But basically, wild bitter types were often grown kind of accidentally, just in people's garbage heaps, and just where they would throw other waste out. They would just end up with wild almonds growing there. And eventually they started to select out that sweet almond, and they started to actually cultivate that intentionally in orchards. So it's a little unclear as to which exact wild ancestor it is that we get that sweet almond and that domesticated species from. There are a couple theories about it, in part because of where that variety still does grow wild. So, largely a mystery, apparently. But as it turns out, they are actually one of the earliest domesticated fruit trees, because you could actually raise these attractive almond fruits from a seed. So, they're actually nice to look at. I mean, they are a little weird because they do look a little leathery. They are grayish green, but in general, they're a nice shape. And I could definitely see the appeal of having that as a fruit tree that you're able to use to impress your neighbors, right? Now, we do know that actually from the historical standpoint that the almond fruit was found in Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt. And remember that that tomb was established around 1325 BCE. So that's a long time to know that we've had some form of cultivated almond fruit, probably imported from the Levant. But there also appears to be archaeological evidence of these almond fruits, and thus the domesticated almond, in the early Bronze Age type of archaeological sites, particularly as Numeira, which is in Jordan, and that is near the southern edge of the Dead Sea. And we know that the city was violently destroyed around 2300 BCE due to carbon dating, but we have found evidence of the almond fruit there, so that tells us that the almond fruit was domesticated at least as early as 2300 BCE, and obviously probably before, because they had about 10 to 12 generations before they were destroyed. And the destruction of Numeira is actually thought to be 200 years earlier than the currently assumed date for the destruction of Sodom. Sodom being one of the two biblical cities that got destroyed for disobedience and unrighteous behavior, largely, is the quick sum up there. Now, what's interesting also is that Numeira still does remain a strong candidate for the actual archaeological site of that biblical Sodom, among some other ones, but it's largely due to its proximity to the Dead Sea compared with other historical writings that talk about Sodom's location and proximity to the Dead Sea. And then, of course, the story of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. The Dead Sea has, nothing living in it, hence why it's called the Dead Sea, and there's the high salt content, and you can see salt pillars and everything all around. So lots of things going on there where we have archaeological evidence kind of corresponding with what we have as far as biblical and cultural stories. I always find that interesting when that happens. So there's that. From an etymological standpoint, etymology, I can say it as that rather than as the noun rather than the adjective, but languages, not bugs. But from the etymology of the name almond, it actually comes from the Old French word almande or alemande and the late Latin amandula, which is derived from the Greek amygdala, which of course comes from the amygdalus genus that it has, all that good stuff. That AL or A sound, depending on what language you're looking at and the pronunciation that you're looking at, is actually currently thought to be due to a misunderstanding of the Arabic language. So I speak Spanish, and in studying Spanish, I know that there are a lot of words that come from the Arabic. You've got alfombra, alhambra, those kinds of things that we have, and they all come from Arabic. And one of the ways that you recognize it is because that AL beginning. But what this was saying that actually makes total sense when you think about it is that AL, or the A sound in Arabic, is actually their version of an article. So, in English we have A and an. In Spanish they have el and la. So the el in Spanish is very similar to the Arabic al. And so it's just fascinating to me that it could actually be that the word is just monde, or something along those lines, and the all is telling us that it's the monde. So I just think that that's really cool. Now, in the Italian, the word is actually just mandorla, and it doesn't have that A at the beginning. And it's one of the first non-Arabic words to actually have dropped the A at the beginning of the word. So then, you think about the British pronunciation of just almond, and it just continues to help highlight the idea that we, as largely European descended people, that's me at least, if you're not, then you're excused from this kind of thing, but largely European cultures just continue to misunderstand other people. And, it's like the legend about the name Yosemite. Some of them are killers, right? So it's interesting. How something that starts as a miscommunication ultimately becomes just the norm for something else. Now, coming back to the sweet versus bitter almond variety situation, the bitterness actually comes from a single gene in the almond, and it is actually recessive, so it's pretty easy to actually domesticate and cultivate for. You can eat bitter almonds, just don't eat a lot of them. That's like the big thing. And always make sure that you're eating almonds that have been domesticated. Try not to eat almonds in the wild because that has not been controlled for. So anyway, what's interesting with that is that the fruits then are always bitter, no matter which variety you've got. But the fruits of the almond tree are always bitter, as are actually the seed kernels, so that part that you could eat of the stone fruits that are the apricots, peaches, and actually even cherries. So that just kind of continues to show the relationship between this entire genus of these prunus plants, which, again, I think is interesting. Now, where it actually starts to matter, where you're talking about bitterness, is that the bitter almond contains 50% of the fixed oil that occurs in sweet almonds. So you're going to find a much drier seed to eat if you're eating a bitter almond. And it also contains the enzyme emulsin in the bitter almond, which in water yields glucose, cyanide, and benzaldehyde, which is the actual essential oil of bitter almonds. And sweet almonds, you can also get sweet almond essential oil, but that's how you actually go about getting the essential oil, is you soak things in water and all that. Now, of course, notice the cyanide. The cyanide is going to occur in 42 times the amount that it does in sweet almonds and bitter almonds. So yes, a bitter almond has 42 times the amount of cyanide that a sweet almond does. So, take your risks with that, I guess, but I, wouldn't. What that means is that a single bitter almond will yield between 4 and 9 milligrams of that hydrogen cyanide. So, again, be cautious with that. The extract of bitter almonds was actually once used medicinally, but even in small doses, the effects are either severe or lethal, especially in children. So don't use anything with bitter almond in it for your children, just at all. Now in 2010, so this is recent enough, the FDA did actually report that there were some fractions of sweet almonds that had been imported, and they were contaminated with bitter almonds. Eating them then was found to, if you ate them, you could actually experience vertigo or other poisoning effects that are in line with cyanide poisoning. So, once again, be cautious about eating almonds. Now, in general, almonds do actually have many uses and forms. You can find almond milk, marzipan, all these different kinds of things, almond flour. And in general, you're not going to actually suffer any consequences from that. They are pretty good for you. They are a nutritionally dense food, and so you really don't need to be that worried about them. But again, if you do eat too many, you can actually, sorry, cat again, you can suffer some interesting side effects, such as digestive issues, because too much fiber in the seed can cause some problems for you. Vitamin E overdose, weight gain, because again, they are nutritionally dense. So that's why when you're eating them, to help curb other snacking, you're supposed to eat 15. That's it, because they are very, very dense nutritionally. They also can lead to kidney stones, self-induced allergy by having too much in one go, and they can also have negative interaction with your medications, or if you are eating bitter almonds, they can produce those toxic effects. So that's fun. So, now that I've kind of made you worried about all almonds, and, think twice about eating those, he was better up until that point. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and, briefly talk about those peanut butter cups and maybe make you feel a little better about life. Now, peanut butter cups were actually invented by H.B. Reese, who gives his name to the candy, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. And that was invented or created, at least on November 15th, 1928. And, peanut butter cup has that chocolate exterior. It can be any kind of chocolate. Most commonly, it's milk chocolate that has a peanut butter center. Please do not bonk against my mic. You're going away now. H.B. Reese was actually a dairy farmer and a shipping foreman for Milton S. Hershey. So he worked for the Hershey Company, and he eventually left Hershey to start his own candy business. And today, Hershey obviously now owns Reese's again. And as part of the Hershey Company, Reese's generates more than $2 billion annually. So it's definitely a major asset to the Hershey Company. And that peanut butter cup, that Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, is number 1 on the list of top-selling candy brands. So, there's always the meme around Halloween of dear children, I gave birth to you, and so as a result, you will give your peanut butter cups to me. It's clearly a popular candy. I mean, I myself like them. There are, of course, other brands of peanut butter cups out there. There's a brand called Palmer, and they apparently specialize in holiday peanut butter cups. I've never heard of them. I don't think I've ever seen the holiday peanut butter cup like that, except for Reese's attempt at holiday trees. There's also, of course, Justin's. Butterfinger apparently makes their own peanut butter cup. Chocure, which is an Aldi brand, does, and Trader Joe's also has a peanut butter cup brand. TasteOfHome.com did a blind taste test with Butterfinger Chucker, Justin's, Reese's, and Trader Joe's. And then what they found was, no, don't do that, that the Trader Joe's was more of an honorable mention for them. It ranked third with a score of 7.4 out of 10. I don't know all the ways that they decided to score this, but that's what that one was from this particular website. Reese's was actually the runner-up, so second place with 8.6. And the winner was the Aldi brand Chucker with 9.5 out of 10. So just because Reese's is the creator and the most well-known does obviously not mean that it is necessarily the best. I myself tend to buy the Justin's or the Theo brands, in part because even though I have now essentially debunked Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade for myself, I still like the idea of trying to support those efforts and rewarding companies for making some form of minor effort. So there's that. I'm gonna go ahead and look over here. It's not really a super attractive color. It's not super dark. It's pretty light. Not really clear either. I can't see to the bottom of my cup very well at all. It's more of a yellow brown now that I've got my tea bag out of the way there. Now, as I was shifting that around a little bit there and leaning over my tea bag, I could smell some of that peanut butter still coming through. So that's promising. And the cat came back. You just have to be part of everything, don't you? You want to smell? No, he definitely does not want to smell. As far as cats are concerned, he says this is not something that you should smell. But, you know. I get a very fruity taste out of this tea. Oh, God. Okay. It is very, very fruity. I think the apple chunks are just too big, too prevalent. I was worried that I hadn't washed my tea bag out well enough, but I had washed it until basically all I could smell was soap. So I was worried that I was going to get a soapy taste, but no, I'm getting fruit. And then after the fruit, I get a little bit of peanut butter. I mean, I don't mind putting apples into my peanut butter, but if I'm being promised peanut butter cup, I'm expecting more chocolate notes. I'm expecting more peanut butter. I'm not expecting apple. And the taste of that peanut butter just goes away so fast. Basically, I get anticipated. I'm anticipating getting peanut butter. I'm anticipating getting something that's going to taste like that right as I put my mouth up to the cup. And then as soon as I get it into my mouth, the peanut butter goes away and I end up with just that very fruity apple taste. So it's pretty disappointing overall on that front. So if I'm looking here, yeah, I think I have hit a new low. I think that this one is absolutely currently my least favorite. So on that note, I hope you have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.